Hey, good morning to everybody. Happy Wednesday. It's Daryl here. It is bright and freaking early, man. It's 3 a.m. here in Connecticut on the East Coast. Okay, I wasn't even going to talk about this, but I got a busy day. I actually got an appointment, my third appointment at the dentist today. I did a video a little while back about a tooth falling out, and I'm going to get a new set of dentures. This is the third set I got. Right after I got into recovery, I've been clean and sober for 17 and a half years, since October 23rd of 2006. When I got into recovery, every single tooth in my mouth, every single tooth was rotted out at the gums. I had the most hideous smile. When I opened my mouth, I was one of those people that just had broken, rotted teeth all across, missing and broken, rotted stubs in my entire mouth. And this was because all the years of drug use that of drug use and abuse. And today I'm going to get my third set of dentures. I've been clean and sober since October 23rd of 2006. The purpose of this video is recovery is possible. And the purpose of this video, I'm going to talk about the first time I ever used Coke. And the reason I'm talking about this is because I came across an article, Dax Shepard's podcast. Kevin Costner's on it, and he talks about the first time he ever used Coke. And the link's going to be right down below so you can listen to it yourselves. I'm going to describe it to you, and then I'm going to tell you, because the first thing that popped into my mind, I clearly remember I was about 17. I was 17 years old the first time I used Coke. That was over 40 years ago, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. You know, it was just a couple hours one night when I was a junior in high school, and I still remember it clear as day. The first time I ever used it. Now let me tell you how it was deceptive. I'm not saying I was tricked, but it was very deceptive the first time I used it. And I'll talk about the first time I ever smoked crack. And then I'll tell you what it ended up being like. And I'll talk about that in a second. Okay. So on this podcast, like I said, the link's down below if you want to listen to it yourselves. Kevin Costner is on Dax. I love Dax Shepard. I love his movies. I mean, I love his wife. I got a crush on his freaking wife. I forgot her name now. And Kevin Costner's on Dax Shepard's show. And he's talking about being a stage producer or a stage manager when he first started out in acting. And he talks about how some electricians were doing a job, a very high profile job, and they were spending a lot of money. And this is before Kevin Costner made it big. And they called Kevin in the back, and they shared a little Coke with him, because they to show their appreciation. It's so odd how people do this. You know, it's like, oh, I'm doing this. You know, I'm granting my. It's like they're blessing somebody. You know, when somebody shares their drugs like this, it's like they're blessing you with this. You know, this expensive, like it's giving you gold or something like that. And really, it's quite the opposite. They're exposing you to a lifelong, potentially exposing you to a lifelong addiction in pure hell is really what it's doing. Like I said, I'll talk about my situation in a second. So they lay it down, and these electricians and Kevin Costner, and he talks about how he did one line, then two lines, then three lines, and he stopped right there. Honestly, looking back, it probably barely even hit him. The first time I did it, I really didn't feel it for a while. I didn't feel it hard. I didn't feel much at all. And he said to the electricians, he said, "How much is this worth on the table?" And they said, "Oh, it's about $20 worth." And he said, "Well, you know, I'm trying to buy a house, and I would rather, how about you just give me a $20 bill, you know, and you can keep your Coke." I love him. You know, I love the fact that he said this. I wish to God that was my line of thinking. I wish to God I thought I did the same thing Kevin Costner did, because I didn't. I thought it was really cool. I thought it was going to help me be an extrovert. I thought it was going to help me go to parties and be the life of the party and get girls' phone numbers, which it did at first. And then it turned into a pure hell. Okay, so like I said, the link to that's down below. And he never used it again. Kevin Costner never used it again. Now, let me say this again. The reason I'm making this video is I'm telling you that recovery is possible. I've been clean and sober from all this stuff for over 17 and a half years. I still can't believe it's been that long. I haven't had a sip of beer. I haven't had liquor. I haven't had any pills other than things that were prescribed to me. I had a hip replacement, so I haven't touched not a speck of Coke and not a speck of heroin. I was a full-blown heroin addict every day. And I am clean and sober now, and I owe a lot of that to the methadone clinic. And I'll do that. I'll talk about that in another video. Okay, so this is the first time I ever used coke, and I still remember it clear as day. I was in high school. Let me tell you this: when people do drugs, and some people are like me. I'm a risk taker. You know, my mind's always thinking, and I'm willing to take risks. And I don't know why I'm like that. Like, I'm one of those guys that like hot food, and I drink black coffee, and I've been in the hospital. I've broken like 10 bones. I've gotten stitched up. I'm a risk taker. And people like me, a lot of times, we're exposed to drugs, and right away our mind starts clicking, like, what's a way to get this easier and quicker, you know? And I'm one of those people that starts thinking, well, I'm going to go get it myself, and then I'm going to start selling some, you know. I'm an enterprising. That's the weird thing. A lot of addicts turn out to be very successful businessmen. A lot of drug dealers turn out to be very successful businessmen, because it's the same kind of mindset. Even though, you know, you're using your powers for evil instead of good, and now I'm using my powers for good, and I'm very successful now. But we'll talk about that in another video. All right. So the first time I started messing around like with weed when I was like 14 years old, and one of my older friends, he was a year or two older than me, and he had a connection to like this green bud sinsemilla. And he promised to sell me like an ounce or something like that. And I went to meet him, and he didn't have it, but he had some cocaine. So he said, well, I'll give you, you know, I was only 17 years old. And he said, how about, you know, you give me $25, I'll give you a quarter gram. So I had never tried it before. So I said, okay. And I met him that night. And he kind of screwed me over, because what happened is I showed up at his house, you know, and his parents were out. His parents were teachers and hall monitors in the high school. You know, and he lived in this big, expensive house here in Connecticut, and he was also dealing. So I sit down, and you know, he just chops me out a line, and then he does a line. He does 2 lines, and he chops me out like a little tiny line, and then he does 3 lines, and he chops me out a little line, and then he does like 4 lines, and then he tells me, well, that's your $25 worth. You know, take it easy. I'll see you to the door. That's the first time. He didn't even give me a quarter gram. He screwed me over. You know, he sat there, he had me give him $25. He gave me a little teeny bit, you know, just as a token, and then threw me out of his house. That's how it started. So that night after I left there, it took a while to hit me. I was by myself. I was in my car. I was like, well, what do I do now? And I started feeling like everything's great. I started getting this like everything's great feeling. I'm like, wow, this is cool. And I drove to Kmart. I was driving a 73 hot rod Formula muscle car, Formula Firebird. And I drove to Kmart to start looking. You know, I was like, well, I'm gonna go wash my car. I'm gonna go buy stuff for my car. You know, I'm gonna do this all night. You know, and I had all this energy and all these ideas. So I go to Kmart and I'm shopping, and you know, and everything's great and everything. And next morning I wake up and I'm like, what did I buy half of this junk for? Because, you know, after I went to Kmart, I ended up going home and crashing, and you know, that was it. And here's the deceptive part. The first times I ever used coke, I felt the upside, but I didn't feel the downside. You know, I didn't. That came later. You know, the high I started to need way more to get the high, and the lows became a lot more pronounced. Like, you know, and then it got to the point where I was low almost all the time. You know, every day I'd wake up and I was low, and I just need coke just to get to an operating level. You know, and that's how it was deceptive, because I didn't feel that the first time. The very first times I used it, I felt this energy, and I didn't feel the crash. You know, I remember this other time. This is like the second or third time I used it. I went out with my friends, and I probably went to the same guy like an idiot after he burned me, and I got another like half gram, and I went to this party, and I was the life of the party. And I'm not just saying that, you know. I remember back then we had these like disco shoes, like John Travolta shoes. They were gray, like disco shoes with like a little shoestring, and we had these really narrow ties. And I went to the party all decked out, and I knew the Michael Jackson moonwalk, so I'm in the middle of the floor doing the moonwalk backwards and everything, and I'm talking, and I'm the life of the party, and I'm doing imitations. And my friends after, like, dude, like 3 or 4 girls came up to me, and they're like, you gotta bring this guy to more parties. He's fantastic, you know, he's hilarious. And I got phone numbers, and I'm like, oh my God, this stuff is, you know, the cocaine is like the answer to my dreams, man. You know, and that was the deceptive part of it. Let me skip ahead now. The first time I used crack, now I started to use coke a little more regularly. First it started on the weekends, and then I started to feel the downside of it. I'd feel the up, and then after an hour or two, I'd start to feel like a crash. Everything's not so great. Everything kind of sucks. I'm tired. I'm irritable. I'm angry. I get in arguments with my girlfriend. I get in arguments with my friends. And that was the downside, because that's all it does. It increases, it just shoots off all the adrenaline in your brain. So you get this fantastic feeling, but you freaking pay for it. Because you crash, then your mind, your brain is depleted of all those natural chemicals that make you feel naturally good, and you feel terrible. You feel freaking terrible after. So we're sitting in my friend's driveway, and we're smoking weed. And I'm like, come on, let's go get some coke. Let's go get some coke, And my friend says, I got something better. And he pulls out some rock, some cooked crack, some freebase cocaine. And he rolls it in the joint. And that's the first time I ever smoked crack, was in a joint. And this guy, this guy introduced me to it. And every time I used after that, it was with him. And then it got to the point where we were just smoking it out of like a can or out of a pipe. And he would just talk for hours. And with me, I would go straight up for like 5 minutes, and then bam, I'd crash, and I'd want more. And this guy, he'd just talk and talk and talk, and his buzz would last for hours, or it seemed like. And I would just get so annoyed, and I'd be like, give me more, give me more. After 5 minutes, I needed more. After 2 minutes, I needed more. After 30 seconds, I needed another hit. That's the deceptive part. From the first time I used it to just like a year or two later, it's a whole different ball game. It's just I get this intense high, and then I just get a crash, and everything sucks. In the end, when I was 40 years old, back in 2006, 2005, the last times I used, I was with a bunch of crack addicts sitting in a rundown 3-room little shack. And it was empty. There was no TV, no radio. My friend lived there. I don't know what he did, because all that was in there was a couch. And he didn't work, and he just laid on the couch all day and waited for people to show up there and use with him. And I don't know what he would do. And it stunk to high heaven in there. It just like sweat and body odor. And people would bring over computers and radios to trade. I brought over my Hardy Boys collection. I brought over my Matchbox collection, all this stuff I had from when I was a kid, my baseball card collection. And I traded it all for like $10 to get another hit. And we would sit around the house, and nobody would talk. We'd all sit around the kitchen table, and nobody would say a word. Like 5 of us just sitting there. When's he gonna get here? When's he gonna get here, man? Come on, what's taking him so long? And then this friend ended up going to jail several times. And that's what it ended up being. It went from this high where I felt great and I didn't feel the downside. I went shopping at Kmart, and 10, 20 years later, it was just a living freaking nightmare. I couldn't trust my friends. The moment I stepped out of my car to go in and buy a soda at the convenience store, my friends would go through my whole car and steal all the change or anything of value. And these were the people closest to me. I could not trust them. I couldn't trust anybody. There was no fun. There was no talking. There was no excitement. It was just this tenseness of sitting around, not saying a word, just staring at each other and arguing about the last piece of what we had to share or what we were going to use. Come on, give me a hit, man. And just this arguing, and it was a living freaking nightmare, and it was so deceptive. If there is a devil, and if there is a devil, and there's an evil substance on this earth that the devil put here, it's definitely cocaine, because the way this drug is just so deceptive. Or maybe we just fool ourselves. Maybe I just fooled myself. Maybe that's it too. I don't know. But was my first times using different things, and the final time. I hope this video gets monetized, but I'm not going to hold my breath. I wanted to share that with you. Recovery is possible. These last 17 and a half years of my life have been the best years of my existence. 58 years on this planet. The best. I dated fantastic women, successful, funny, sexy women who don't use. I've got bank accounts. I've got a lot of stuff, and I'm happy, and it's the best years of my life. Recovery is possible. Have a good Wednesday.